But I'll just say that what we're going to do now is really quite important to the program. We think that facts matter a lot, and the dean's really quite generous and I think illustrative comments highlighted the importance of transparency to any movement. And that's particularly true of a movement that is defined by the hidden spaces and defined by the quite deliberate efforts to keep things hidden through legislation, through walls, through fences. And so as a program, we came up with an award to say, well, how do we get more facts out into the conversation? How do lawyers ever succeed if their stories aren't told? How does an acquittal of somebody like Paul and Wayne matter if no one knows? Sort of the tree falling problem. And this is true of all social movements, but it's particularly a problem when you don't have lawyers who are able to interview these clients, right? There are animals that are suffering that, as the prosecutor said, Paul didn't touch any of these pigs, right? But that I guess that Wayne carried out, right? Wayne's got all the blame there. But he touched these two pigs, and Paul filmed him doing so. But they aren't able to tell their stories, right? Their stories are completely hidden. They can't be interviewed. And it's not like the normal client or the normal case where there's going to be a story. And so we really rely more than other movements on journalists in this way who will do the work of not just following the tropes of the industry and the sort of stories that were commonly passed on. And so we wanted to give our first ever Sunlight Award. And it's an award to a journalist. And the journalist we're giving it to is already award-winning, but the idea was to be able to have in journalists' bylines that they are award-winning journalists. And we think that this is a significant award. So we sought out nominations and we received many, I think more than 24 in a really short period of time. And I am delighted to say that the person that we selected is here with us, and I'm going to say who it is in a moment, but she first should be described by her nominations, and there are a couple of them that I want to share. So a very long nomination came in from Animal Outlook, and Animal Outlook said, and I'm quoting, but I have taken out some of the text just to make it shorter, her work focuses on factory farming and the criminalization of activists who fight it. From working directly with her on a story, we found her to be one of the most thorough, detailed, comprehensive, and intelligent journalists we have interacted with. Most recently, she covered ventilation shutdown and avian influenza in a compelling piece in The Intercept that masterfully wove together a complicated storyline into a highly informative piece of journalism. Another nominator said that if you want the same old stories about the law, the same old story about the same old animal law groups doing the same stuff, then this person would not be the one. But if you're looking for someone who's looking for new stories, for looking for longer narratives, looking for the long-term paradigm shift, then she's your person. That is how we picked Marina Bolotnikova, and we wanted to honor her as the journalist who's done this. And we want to give you this award, Marina, and thanks so much for the work that you're doing. We're really honored to have you here tonight. So thank you. I'm going to give you this. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that incredibly generous introduction, Justin. Can everybody hear me? This is beautiful. I'm overwhelmed. Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here amid so many extraordinary people. I know some of you, but most of you I don't know, so please do introduce yourself later at the reception. This is such a beautiful day in Denver, by the way. I didn't know that you had a real autumn in the Mountain West before today. So I've been thinking for a few weeks about what I want to speak about to this audience. When I first heard that I'd be getting this honor, I thought, what should I talk about? Maybe I can give an adapted version of a talk I've been giving about ventilation shutdown in the poultry industry, which, let's be honest, has become a stale topic at this point. And of course, I knew Wayne and Paul's trial was around the corner and just had the sense that it would be top of mind for all of us here. And sure enough, I have been thinking about nothing but this trial since it ended on Saturday. Does anyone here not know what trial I'm talking about or what happened there? You don't have to be shy. Okay. And so watching the trial and the verdict, it just reified everything that I have believed deep in my soul about radical activism ever since I was, old enough to form opinions. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. The reason I'm so interested in covering animal activism, direct action in particular, other than my just by nature having problems with authority, is I see it as a lens to think about and report on in a journalistic style possibilities for a radically different world for non-human animals. My field, meaning journalism, is so accustomed to reporting on facts, right? Things that happened, who did what. And I think sometimes journalism just suffers from not having enough imagination. And I think that direct action, by direct action I mean going to the places where the problem is and doing something, however small to fix it, like, rescuing animals from factory farms and not waiting for anyone else's permission. I think that direct action, by changing the facts on the ground, it forces a confrontation between the world that we have now and the world that we want to have or we could have, and that activists are inviting us to have. So just a week ago, in fact, less than a week ago, so many people thought that what happened in St. George, Utah on Saturday was impossible. Part of me definitely thought it was impossible, which is why I pre-wrote a story saying that the activists had been convicted, which I then promptly and happily had to edit when we got the verdict. But a jury in a conservative county in Utah that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump, as Wayne pointed out, and I fact-checked, I did not have high hopes at all. And because Wayne was already convicted of 2 felonies in North Carolina less than a year ago, and plus the whole history of animal activists and environmental activists being locked up for ridiculous charges, it made me go in with really low expectations. And then in the course of half a second, when the court read out the first not guilty verdict for Wayne, I think everyone was just shaken. And I thought, wow, they have really made this a reality. They have persuaded a jury of everyday people in the southwestern corner of Utah, no less, that it is sometimes legal to rescue animals from factory farms, and what an extraordinary precedent. And I don't mean precedent in the formal legal sense, because as Professor Marceau has explained to me, a district court jury decision isn't precedential. But on a broader level, I absolutely think that this is game-changing and will make prosecutors think a lot harder about whether it's in their interest to criminalize animal activists. I remember almost a year ago, last November, when I had been planning to cover the trial of Matt Johnson. He's another DXE activist who was facing trial in Iowa for his investigation that uncovered that the pork industry was roasting animals to death during COVID. I was getting ready to cover his trial, and I remember Justin telling me that if prosecutors get the slightest sense that a jury is willing to acquit in these cases, they are not going to want to bring them anymore. And at the time, that sounded like such a remote theoretical possibility, but DXE has now made it a reality with the Smithfield trial. So earlier this year, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, I heard Timothy Snyder, who is a historian of Eastern Europe at Yale, talking on a podcast about the courage of the Ukrainian people in a way that I just couldn't stop thinking about and that I think is relevant here. So I'm going to read a bit from it. He said, quote, "If the Ukrainians have given us anything, it's that they've bought us time. I feel like every day that they stay on the battlefield buys us a week, a month, a year of thinking about how things could be. Or if you put it the opposite way, imagine that Zelensky had fled and that the state had collapsed. What kind of suffocating, intellectually and morally narrow, hollow world would we be in right now? What would we be talking about right now? Thanks to the fact that they're doing something, they've given us this chance to think bigger." End quote. So I was thinking a lot about that quote as the trial took place, because I see it as exactly what the defendants were doing by staying in this fight. And after the verdicts came in, this beautiful idea that Snyder expressed of buying us time, giving us a chance to think bigger, it seemed even more, appropriate and fitting to the situation. Imagine if Wayne and Paul had gotten scared and taken one of the very favorable plea deals they had been offered in this case. Imagine if we thought that was the best we could do. The defendants obviously couldn't have known they'd get this incredible victory over a ruthless, multi-billion-dollar, multinational behemoth, and we owe it to their courage in taking that risk against the odds that the animal movement's horizons now look so much broader. So I'm neither an activist nor a lawyer, so I think the question of how the animal movement can build on this triumph is sort of not for me to say, but I still have some inchoate thoughts on it anyway. The first is that I think as many people in this audience know, the winning arguments in court in Utah turned, at least in large part, on the fact that the two piglets rescued by Wayne and Paul and the other activists who have pled out of the case were worthless to Smithfield because they were sick and struggling, and they would have ended up among the vast numbers of animals thrown in the dumpster at this factory farm. I know that there was some ambivalence about using a market value-based argument like that because it seems to shore up animals' commodity status, right? And it ties whether or not they have the right to be rescued to their value as property. However, I think that the value-based argument in reality actually empowered the jury to make what they already knew was the right decision morally, almost as a pretense or a kind of legal formality. They were instructed to consider the value of the allegedly stolen property, and that provided a justification for them to think, okay, the rescue of these poor animals was not theft, so we have a valid legal rationale to do the right thing in this decision. And furthermore, I don't think that this legal technicality has really factored into the impression the case has made on the public consciousness either, in the news stories and all the attention the trial has gotten on social media. I think the message that a layperson gleans from it is, wow, these heroic activists rescued animals from this horrific place, and this compassionate jury rightly acquitted them. I think the prosecution realizes this too, that people want to acquit because they care about animals and not because of the technical details of the statute. So I think that the market value of animals is actually, it's a really smart meat industry vulnerability to exploit in litigation, because as we know, they throw away so many animals. And as activists go through more trials, I think more vulnerabilities like this will present themselves. I was so excited when I found out about this new animal activism defense clinic at DU, because direct action is such a vital part of the animal movement. It's like the beating heart of the movement, in my opinion. But I think the legal theory and strategy needed to help it reach its full potential and to not just to keep activists out of prison, as Justin said, but to change the world, it's an underdeveloped part of animal law. The Smithfield trial showed what the combination of direct action and an incredible legal team can achieve. Wayne was an incredible trial lawyer, as was Paul's attorney, Mary Corcoran, and both of them, their heroic work was essential to winning this trial. But that kind of representation does not come cheap. And I think that having DU lawyers and law students work on exactly these types of cases can develop a whole new area of animal law. It can train a new generation of lawyers to work with activists and understand their objectives. And it can enable more activists to do work that comes with huge liability, and know that they'll have some representation. I really think this clinic is such an innovative and smart idea that will distinguish DU's animal law program and break some new ground in a movement that badly needs to try out some new strategies. So since I already opened up this metaphorical space between animal rights and Eastern Europe or former Soviet countries, I would also say that to me, those parallels go a lot deeper. So people ask me all the time how I became interested in factory farming and animal liberation. It's something that is such a fundamental part of my life that I struggle to have an answer. But to the extent that I have an answer, I'd say that in many ways, my life has been shaped by the fallout of atrocities. I was born in Belarus to a Jewish family. My grandparents survived World War II as children, and from a country that saw one of the highest rates of extermination of its Jewish population. And I know that we're encouraged to be careful about drawing connections between human rights and animal rights, and there are certainly reasons to maintain those distinctions. But to me, animal exploitation is such an obvious part of the history of organized violence and mass extermination. This is why, it would be absurd to pretend otherwise, and this is why I cover it and try really hard to get editors that I work with to see it as the urgent and serious beat that it is, and not as some sideshow. So covering factory farming and animal exploitation in mainstream publications for a living is really hard because of a combination of structural problems within the industry and just baked in speciesism and carnism that cuts across all of society. By the way, Almira, no one will insure me either, because when I tried to get media libel insurance, which is not cheap, I was told that they don't insure anyone who does investigative journalism into Fortune 1000 companies. So it's cliche at this point to say that journalism is in crisis, but it's very much true. The traditional business models have collapsed, and that's always going to mean more cuts to the most marginalized beats, like animal exploitation. One of the most frustrating things to me is when a publication suddenly decides that they're going to do a big story about the debate over animal rights, and they talk to the same 3 people that are always quoted in basic stories about animal rights and rehash the same elementary points that animal advocates have been trying to get people to understand for decades. So in this environment, it can be difficult as a writer to try to go a layer deeper, to write about people who are on the cutting edge of animal advocacy or tell meaningful news stories. Because anytime I approach an editor, I have to assume that they have no baseline understanding of this beat. So that's a piece of advice I would stress for anyone working in the animal space who is pitching story ideas to editors or writers. You must assume that they know nothing and figure out how to explain why your story matters from a baseline of nothing, while also making it as concise as possible, which is a really hard thing to do. That's why it's such a hard industry. One thing journalism is set up well to do is to tell human dramas, character-driven stories, and that is something that direct action naturally produces. These are stories of human courage and sacrifice and commitment, and that is the foundation of all good storytelling. And the characters don't have to be human either. We can be inclusive of characters like Lily and Lizzie, who are rescued from Smithfield. But the Smithfield trial was literally like David and Goliath, and in a way, a courtroom is a perfect battlefield in spite of all the barriers judges try to impose on animal activists to prevent them from telling their stories. I also think that perhaps once the Smithfield trial really became a huge story, some people in media realized that they blew it by sleeping on this trial and not covering it. And I hope that means there will be more news stories on similar cases in the future, even though it may mean more competition for me. I would welcome that. For any members of the media who may be listening to this now or later, I would just say that stories about DXE, including the one I recently wrote about the Smithfield trial, are consistently among the top read stories in The Intercept, and there is absolutely a large dedicated audience who will read them and share them. So I'm very hopeful that the Utah verdict will start to lend more credibility to the direct action wing of the animal movement, or the radical wing. I know there are reasons people want to shy away from the word radical, as will the activist defense clinic will do that too. And I don't know whether I can say I'm particularly optimistic about ending animal exploitation, if I'm being honest, but giving up is not an option. And if there's any way out of our current horror show, I know it will be thanks to the people in this room. To put it again in Snyder's words, thanks to the fact that you're doing something, you've given us a chance to think bigger. Thank you.
So I think we'll just go out to the reception, or maybe just out these doors and to the right, and the main floor of the law school. Thanks so much. And tomorrow we'll be in this room at 11.